So the APL is trying to lower A-League player wages, and the PFA don't want a bar of it, just when we thought we were all getting along. The precarious financial status of the A-League has been well understood for years now. We are in a period of survival, one that necessitates responsible spending, realistic expectations, and often concessions where we don't want them. APL Chair Stephen Conroy's proposed salary cap changes reflect this. It doesn't indicate a further fall since COVID and the grand final disaster, but rather another, in the view of the APL, overdue course correction. There is a very strong case to say that a regulated reduction in the player wage bill at a club's is a productive idea in the short term. The real problem? Well, they forgot to tell the players. The PFA and the APL are currently into the second to last year of the current collective bargaining agreement, meaning any changes will contractually have to wait until the 26-27 season. But even then, talks for the new CBA haven't yet begun, with the PFA claiming the APL are negotiating against themselves and won't accept half-baked cost-cutting solutions. Spicy. We'll take you through the full details of the proposal, how it aligns with a new broadcast deal, and what could happen next. Then, the Sydney FC's heartbreaking exit from the Champions League 2. Their 1-0 win over Lion City Sailors not enough to overturn the first leg deficit and claim a home continental final. We'll ask who actually has the best run home, as all of the top 6 contenders have their ledgers squared at 3 games to play, some encouraging viewership numbers for the leagues, and some Aussies off to the Club World Cup on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan Avil, and tonight I'm joined by Jacob Stevens. Jacob, yesterday was just one of those days on Wednesday where everything seemed to happen at once, and the banner of crisis in Australian football got wiped back down to zero.
It's crazy how quickly the response from the PFA came as well. That's the bit that surprised me. Was it's almost like they were expecting something to come out with how quickly they managed to get their statement out in the aftermath of that. But yeah, one of those days, like you said, it all sort of came to a head in that late afternoon, and then to top it all off with the Asian Champions League 2 matchup as well. It was just a hectic afternoon really of football in Australia. 2 injuries. It's just there's just been a whole lot going on, and all at the same time. It's been a lot to process.
Christian Montegan, hello to you. As Jacob just kind of alluded to, we learnt that Mary Fowler is also out with an ACL. That's now all of a sudden just a race to be fit for the Asian Cup next year. And Jackson Irvine as well, who's been very consistent for club and country recently.
Yeah, it feels like Australian football is just crumbling before our very eyes. I think Vince Vigo sent out a tweet like an hour or so ago. It was pretty funny, just saying how this Mary Fowler ACL got Ange Postecoglou on the ropes, and now this salary cap drama. It's all sort of happening. But I guess this is Australian football. We're used to it. How all these negative news headlines just compound one after another, and you get these cycles, right? But then afterwards you get the good storylines, and once the A-League finals rolls around, that's when we'll be talking about, hopefully some good stories, and it will sort of even itself out.
For sure. All right, let's get stuck into this salary cap business. So this all came about on Wednesday. A bunch of journalists were invited to a media, catch up with Stephen Conroy is the best way to describe it. And in it, he talked about proposed changes to the salary cap for the A-League men's competition. But they didn't really come across as proposals. They kind of came across as this is what is happening. And that's where a lot of the controversy has come from. So we'll detail what his plan is first, Jacob. The current soft cap in the A-League is, as I say, it's a soft. It sits at 2.55 million Australian dollars per year that clubs are allowed to spend on what is a majority of their playing squad. And then you have these things called exemptions. So we think of our marquee players, which can sit outside the cap. That's a Douglas Costa. That's a big, easy one there. But also things like scholarship contracts for young players, loyalty contracts. So someone like a Lee Broxham, when he was still playing at Melbourne Victory, he was the best example of it. He was getting, I believe, up to 50% of his wages considered outside of the cap because he's been at Melbourne Victory for so long. And designated players as well, which is kind of a step down in that 300 to 600 range. They weren't marquee, but they still were outside the cap. Under the new proposal by Conroy, the first thing here is that there's a hard limit of 3 million. So that is an increase of 2.55. But crucially, only one marquee player sits outside of that cap. And there are no scholarship players, no loyalty, and no designated players. That is a very big change.
Yeah, I think the big thing, well, the first thing that came to my mind, at least when I saw it all, was the scholarship player bit, right? Because that's something that we've seen clubs tap into a lot more recently. Is feeling like it's almost sort of risk free to be able to give these younger players an opportunity, because you can give them a scholarship contract, and it's not going to necessarily count against the cap, and you can keep them almost sort of separate and develop them as a longer term project, rather than having to have them out there on the field every single match week. So that's an interesting change for mine, and I think a lot of people haven't perhaps spoken about it as much as I was expecting, because it's a league that we've been talking about consistently wanting to become this development league and looking at youth players and stuff, and now it seems like perhaps there's going to be maybe less pathways, fewer pathways for these players. Although on the flip side to that is that if there is a genuine hard cap at 3 million or 3.5 million even next season, where they're kind of saying they want to try and do what they can to meet that limit, then perhaps there's no option but to play young players, because it's all you can afford anyway. So no, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. It is a little bit of a worrying sign that the APL feels the need to implement this sort of strategy, because as they said, it's not for competitive balance reasons, right? It's not for competition integrity or anything like that. It's simply so that these clubs can survive, because currently they're spending way too much money and it's not feasible for them. And that's a worrying thing to have to admit. And we know obviously Melbourne Victory are the only club that publicly report their finances in the league, but last season it was a loss of $10 million for them, which is not an insignificant amount of money for a football club, especially in Australia. So it is a worrying sign that for some reason these clubs are overextending and they're spending too much money. And the extra worrying thing is that at least Vince Regari reported that there wasn't a single club that was spending less than 3 million. They were all in excess of that. That's clubs, even clubs in cost-cutting, mode, are spending more than $3 million. That's a big indictment, I think, on the financial viability of football in this country. And I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, but it's not a good sign.
Yeah, so that's a really important point that you raised, because Christian, a lot of people will hear 2.55 up to 3 million and think maybe it's gone up. Obviously, we've talked about the lack of exemption players, but part of this, what we learnt today, Wednesday, is that no club is below that 3 million mark, and the average of what clubs spend is actually well in excess of that. So it really is a reduction in what clubs are allowed to spend. And the idea behind it is to kind of stop what Conroy described as like an arms race for players, right? So if all of a sudden you're reducing everyone's capacity to spend, then you're not going to have that kind of bidding war for these players, and it's going to go up and up. Obviously, we're going to lose some talent because we're going to be able to pay them less money, but to some extent as well, that just the average value of players in Australia will go down.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, it's a very difficult position to be in when you're trying to make these decisions, right? If you're part of this APL board, trying to analyze everything, because you mentioned the rundown, Lockie. Part of the reason is the competitive balance, right? And I think it's a very fine line, because yes, you want that competitive balance, and you've got to be careful that clubs don't go under, right? You've got to ensure that they've got the right finances, that they're not spending overboard. But at the same time, if you're going to go down that road in the long term or even in the short term, both, are you going to, how are you going to grow the league? Are you going to attract more fans that maybe aren't as interested in football as the diehard football fans in this country, right? So only the one marquee player now that clubs can sign. Like, long gone are the days of 10 years ago where you could sign 2, 3 marquee players and it got bums on seats and there was real hype, advertisement, marketing. All of this was off the charts, right? It really grew the league. It brought it to a different level. Now, the past couple of years, we've been used to clubs having basically no choice, as Jacob alluded to play the young players, because they can't afford it, most of these clubs, and it's the right path forward anyway in terms of making a bit of a profit. We've seen clubs extend contracts. They've learned from their past lessons, which is great, but yeah, in terms of that competitive balance aspect, that's where I really find it interesting, in terms of, yeah, the longevity of the A-League and trying to grow the brand as much as possible, because you want these Douglas Costa type players, you want the Juan Martins, you want these big high profile players. That's not to say, again, don't go overboard in the other direction where that was the issue, right? A decade or so ago, where there were too many old players, there were too many recycled players where they were long past it, but yet they saw the name and thought, okay, let's bring them over, bit of a marketing ploy. And yeah, I just think that fine balance is really important to note.
Yeah, so you bring up a really interesting point of competitive balance, right? So when football leagues around the world make rules in terms of what clubs are allowed to spend, I guess the outcome of those rules fall into two categories, right? And the first is sustainability, and that's what these rules are being put in place for. It's for the APL to say, we need you to survive until we, generate some more revenue through a broadcast deal that's more beneficial, until you have time to develop and sell some more young talent, right? But there's another part of that, which is that the second outcome is competitive balance. And it kind of goes reverse, Jacob, when you consider the fact that they've said going into season 27-28, they want to explore the idea of then tying your wage limit to club revenue. So clubs would be able to spend a portion of what they are earning on their players, and that would be their limit, right? So that fundamentally affects competitive balance. This is something that the A-League has been known for. All you have to do is look at the ladder right now and see how tight it is. It's been close in that top 6 the entire way. And that in large part is because of this salary cap system. Now, obviously, we still have the ability for clubs to, go out and get marquees and get designated players, and the teams that do that better have a competitive advantage. But the salary cap limits that to a certain extent. So yes, the Sydneys, the Victories, the Melbourne Cities and the Western Sydneys tend to always come back around again. It leaves space for someone like a Central Coast Mariners to have the dream run they had the last 2 years. But, the comments from Conroy saying that they want to look towards this is much more of a European kind of angle, where if you have clubs that are able, to have a big fan base and generate revenue through memberships, through merchandise, whatever, they will fundamentally be allowed to spend more money, and that is going to tip the scales in some of the bigger clubs' favour.
But my questioning for this, though, is simply, are there any clubs at the moment that are making money, right? Like, it's what happens when it turns out all clubs are losing
it's
money.
Revenue, though. It's revenue.
It is, that is true. That is true.
So,
but then, in which case, it's not about sustainability, is it? Because if it's just simply revenue, then there's no factoring in for how much of that actually becomes profit, and then how much they're actually able to spend versus just you made a bunch of money, but you're just going to spend it all on players anyway. Or I can kind of understand the thinking, but it just seems a little bit weird. Like it's a weird choice. I don't know, maybe it's just me that feels that way. And like you said, Lockie, it does kind of lean more heavily into the hands of those bigger clubs, and my mind immediately goes to Auckland and City as the two that I can see really benefiting from this, because while City's crowds aren't, massively, huge or anything like that, and they're not particularly impressive, they have a lot of backing and a lot of money, and we've seen with some of the City group, some of the ways that they have gone about consolidating money within their football clubs and the creative measures they've gone to for that, and whether or not Melbourne City will then become a beneficiary of those, especially if these rules come in. They might have to look that way. In Auckland, of course, with the backing of Bill Foley and his portfolio as well, there's a lot of money that can be sort of funneled into the club through that means, whereas with a lot of the other clubs in the A-League, that's not necessarily the case, and it will be dependent on things like merchandise and ticket sales and memberships and those sorts of things. So, my mind immediately went to those two clubs as, possibly having the biggest benefit from this sort of rule implementation. But yeah, I don't know. It's all speculation at this point, obviously, but it does seem a little bit of a weird choice. I think that what we've got, the fact that clubs are spending too much money is like, you either draw the line at you're spending too much money, and we then have to weaken basically the competition as a whole, because you can't keep spending that money, you're not going to survive. Therefore, the good players will leave, and you'll be forced to play players who aren't as good, and because they're cheaper and things like that, in which case then Australia's standing as a football nation falls. Or you go, right, you're spending a lot of money on these players. Why is that the case, right? Because like I said, this is not just an isolated few clubs. This is every single club in the league that's doing this. And that includes the likes of a Perth or a Brisbane, who this season, let's be honest, have not looked very good at all. So it's like, well, why are you spending this much money on players when, you know, you're not getting those sorts of performances? I wonder if there's a different way of going about this. I don't know. But yeah, it's just, I do agree it's slightly more European, which I know a lot of people like, because, you know, obviously a lot of us have grown up with European football, or we have those influences through our backgrounds or whatever, and Australian football as well, obviously heavily influenced in its early days by European immigrants. But yeah, I don't know, it just seems a weird call to make, and especially when you combine that with the changes to the salary cap and stuff that they're putting in, it's just, it does seem like they're clutching at straws to try and find something, you know, some sort of miracle to tide over while they try and sort out some of that, like you mentioned, Lockie, those things like broadcast deals and other investment avenues to really help those clubs out. Because yeah, it just, I don't know, it just seems weird to me.
I think it's important to separate the two a little bit as well, because the whole reducing the salary cap thing, that is a short-term play, so that the average value of a player comes down. All the players are kind of worth maybe 15 to 20% less than what they were under the current system, and then it reduces spending for a couple of years until we get the capacity to generate revenue increases. And that whole tying revenue to spending, that is a sustainability move going forward. That allows less competitive balance, but it also just says you can't spend too much, so your club has to stay alive, right? So there has to be a balance of both, but then that's a 3 to 4 to 5 year down the path thing to happen after you've established that financial base and you've come out of this really kind of low period that we're in. And the timing backs this up, Christian. So according to Vince Rugari's report in the Sydney Morning Herald on this topic, his sources have suggested that by the time the 26-27 season rolls around, we'll have finished the initial term of the Network 10 deal. His sources are saying that a new short-term deal with Network 10 is potentially on the cards, starting from that 26-27 season on slightly more favourable terms for the APL. But Conroy was also very clear that he's hoping for more competitive tension from the likes of an ESPN, a DAZN, who've just confirmed their purchase of Foxtel in Australia from the likes of Optus Sport as well. Now, it was my understanding, sorry, just before you go, that Network 10 have this option to extend their agreement for 2 more years, right? And I actually asked Vince this question on Twitter, and his response was, I think that the network are at the point where it's clear that the clubs just need more cash, and extending the deal on the current terms isn't really going to do anyone any good, because it's the similar angle of why Foxtel was so keen to get 2 more clubs in the league, right? 1 in Sydney, 1 in Melbourne, is because they wanted to grow the league. And I think we're almost hitting that point now where the clubs need some more cash, and Network 10 is a possibility to be the ones to inject that cash so the clubs can actually A, survive, and then B, grow into the future.
Yeah, I think short term, it makes a lot of sense. The timeline, it matches up well, doesn't it? But I was thinking as well, with this national second division, is that another reason why the APL has announced this decision, I guess, in this time frame? Because I guess in the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to be another discussion, isn't it? Whether these clubs are going to be able to survive financially, right? So I just wonder if that's another contributing factor towards this decision. I don't think anything's been mentioned by Vince Figari or anyone else that I've read, but yeah, I'm very interested to, I guess, see if that was any part of the decision from the APL board. But yeah, I mean, Network 10, of course, like I said, it makes sense to provide those extra funds for these clubs short term. But again, it's the long term where I think fans have those questions, right? Where I guess those questions have to be answered if this decision turns out to be the right one in terms of this salary cap and the financial decision. So yeah, I guess it's a wait and see.
There's something else as well, just before you go, Lockie, that actually just came to my mind then. And in particular in relation to the revenue side of things, that sustainability measure we were just talking about. obviously a domestic transfer system has been, something that a lot of people have wanted for a long time, and it's something that the APL has mentioned before. It's something Football Australia has mentioned wanting before. I wonder what impact those sorts of revenue to then, player expenditure sort of measures would have on the implementation of a domestic transfer system, and how that would play out, because obviously they've not fully fleshed everything out. These are at this point in time just proposals, but it does seem like it might actually, again, kind of delay that implementation of a domestic transfer system, because one of the benefits, of course, of the domestic transfer system is that you're getting that cash flow within the league. But if the clubs are limited to how much they can spend in the first place, you're probably not going to see much of that movement within the league anyway. So I don't know. I'd be interested to see how the two could, work together, or probably not work together, or whatever, however it might impact one another.
Interesting. So that's the chronology and essentially the detail of what's come out of the APL on Wednesday. Where the drama intensifies is that in Australia, and it happens in most sporting codes in the country, but not necessarily football overseas, there is a real partnership between the governing body, the APL, Football Australia, and then the PFA, so the Professional Footballers of Australia, the Players Union. And a few hours after this all came out, the PFA posted a response on their website and social media channels, very critical of the way that the APL came out and communicated this decision, because the way the salary cap and all the exemptions and all the numbers about how much money players get paid, that is all detailed in the collective bargaining agreement. And they're currently in the middle of one. So when we finish this 24-25 season, we're going to have then one more campaign to go under what is the current CBA, which I think is the reason why you're seeing the APL throw out these kind of phrases like, we're going to have a test one next year at 3.5 million rather than 3. We're not going to enforce it. Because you can't, because you've agreed to a collective bargaining agreement under the current rules. So you can't enforce anything. And the PFA, Bo Bush, who's the CEO, I think he's the CEO. That's his proper title. Claiming that essentially the APL are just negotiating with themselves and coming out with all these things saying this is what we want to do. But in reality, in a few weeks' time, the PFA and the APL are going to come together and start negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement, which is the agreement that is set to then determine, Christian, all these rules. So it feels again like someone has jumped the gun without going through the proper procedures. And even if it is a bit of this is just kind of our ideal scenario, what to look like, it is incredibly clear that the PFA have not been consulted and they haven't even discussed any of these ideas, let alone agreed to them.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I guess, what I always keep harping on about, everyone being on the same page. Is like I keep saying about, it's extremely important, right? Because these issues now, they start to arise, right? How, I guess, different decisions are being made, people disagree, and that creates confusion as much as anything, right? Between, stakeholders, fans, organizations. So, I mean, yeah, even the broadcasters like Network 10, there probably would have been a stage where they might have been in a bit of limbo and not maybe know what was going on until maybe late. So, there's a whole lot of questions. And it was obviously great reporting by Vince Rigo, but there's still, I reckon, a few more details to come out of this as to the actual, I guess, the main decisions, behind it, why it actually occurred and took place in this current moment. I think there's still a bit to be played out, but it's just, when people just don't communicate up the top, it just trickles down, doesn't it? All the way down to the bottom, and you're seeing this, right? Just fascinating how, you expect everyone to know, but then you find out that they actually don't, and it's like, oh, what's going on? Like, this is supposed to be a professional, football organization, and you've got these problems going on. Like, you say to yourself, this shouldn't be happening. It's just crazy. So.
It shouldn't, Christian, but it keeps happening.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
At least it seems like,
Yeah, exactly. You look at years past and you see similar scenarios and examples, and it's like, when do they ever learn their lesson? Where better communication is better for the game. I just don't get it. So I don't know whether they just love to keep secrets and just be stubborn and do it their own way. I don't know, but it's crazy to an extent.
You know what it reminds me of? When Auckland came out and just announced that they were receiving the loan of Alex Paulson before, the
Yeah.
league and Football Australia had even cleared the Caceres clause. It's just
Yeah,
like,
exactly right.
you
Perfect
just
example. Yeah.
you're just going out and jumping the gun, and this
Mm.
is significantly more important than that. So one of these quotes from the PFA release says, quote, "The players have always been reasonable negotiating partners. However, they will not accept half-baked cost-cutting solutions while the same governance structure which got us here remains in place." And now it's not quite as simple as just saying that, the players want more money. I think it was Stefan Mork was on Twitter, got a little bit of traction talking about why they should be the ones that, suffer. I have some empathy for that because the quality of football has definitely increased and the players are doing a lot of good things. The reality is we live in a capitalistic world, right? And, you will be paid what the market can and is willing to pay you. And unfortunately, Jacob, that's not as big as what it used to be. And it seems to be going down a little bit more before it comes back up. But these things do have to be collaborative. And especially with things like players' unions, relationships are so important. And especially for the APL, who have been so quiet so often, it just seems so silly to all of a sudden come out with something like this. Usually if you're going to limit your communications to once every quarter or something, you're going to have a lot of time to think about exactly what you're going to say. And they've still managed to piss some people off.
Part of me thinks it might be some kind of weird long play, strong arm tactic thing, knowing that, the CBA is obviously has the one season left under it and they'll be then renegotiating. It's almost, it almost feels like they're trying to get ahead of it and what our offer is and what it's been for a long time sort of thing. And to that end, it kind of reminds me a little bit of how some American sports have gone in years past, and we've seen player strikes in those because it's been a case of they know what's coming so they can organize those strikes and it sort of becomes a bit of a bigger mess. So look, there's a lot of red flags going up at the moment in my mind, just comparing it to how things have been done around the world in the past. And like you said, you can empathize with players 100%. I mean, anybody who has a job, you want to be paid what you think you're worth. And I found it interesting what you said there, Lockie, about you're only going to get paid what the market is willing to pay. But it seems like the market is willing to pay the money. It's the APL that doesn't want the market to pay that money, given the fact that they're the ones looking to bring in that hard salary cap. Obviously for a sustainability reason, as we touched on earlier. But it seems like they're the ones that are pushing for it, and the market, for some reason, is still in this sort of suicidal death spiral where they're happy to keep spending this money even though it's costing them a lot. So it's a bit of a strange situation. And for the PFA, I do agree with the statement that they have been reasonable negotiating partners, and that's another thing that's raising concerns for me is bringing up the fact that we've always been good faith, that sort of thing. It's like, okay, so are you planning something a bit more this time, like something a bit more drastic, like players going on strike or something like that? Like, it seems like bringing up the fact that you've always been, you've always come to the table and you've always been reasonable with that sort of stuff. It's an interesting thing to mention. But then on the other hand, it's like, they're going to want to make themselves sound as good as possible too. So, I can see both sides to that. But no, it's definitely an interesting situation for Australian football to find itself in. Australian football is, not all dissimilar to the idea of having these interesting situations pop up from time to time, but it's very early, like you said, Lockie. It feels like they have jumped the gun a little bit with making this, not the PFA, the APL, in making these proposals. And touching on what Christian was saying, just the whole lack of communication and things, it's a very, very strange thing to see. And like I said, it does sort of make it, in my mind, seem like perhaps it was a deliberate choice to do this, to try and force a strong reaction out of somebody or something, and see what happens and give it time to marinate, right? You've got now a whole nother season to dwell on this, and things can change. It doesn't take a genius to look at the economy as it is at the moment and see that it's not in a great place and it's very volatile. What's it going to be like in a year's time, right? And then perhaps this offer from the APL is actually pretty reasonable reasonable, and the PFA is gonna want to take it. You know, if they get it on the board early, it looks better for them than if they come in late with it. But you know, a whole lot can change in a year, and there's a lot of work ahead, and I think that there's a lot of communication that still needs to happen between these two parties, because so far it's been pretty substandard, and you know, I think that that's a pretty bad look for the APL to you know, continue to make these decisions and make calls and do things, you know, perhaps without full consultation. I mean, I think they've been dramatically improved over the last couple of years, considering, you know, how things started under the APL. Yeah, but I think there's still a lot of work to do to get to a point where, you know, people can be pretty happy in their decision-making processes.
So given this is the kind of quarterly period that we do hear from Stephen Conroy, we have a couple other bullet points to just hit on real quick. Christian, maybe you can pick out your favourite and jump on it a little bit. But as part of this kind of change in salary cap or whatever, the APL want to include a minimum of 6 under-21 players by the 26-27 season into every A-League squad. So that's going to be mandatory for each club. Obviously, you're pushing that youth angle. It'll also help with, you know, obviously, younger players will demand lower contracts. Stephen Conroy couldn't rule out distributions falling even further than what was the record low of $530,000 last season, although he says the APL is on track to break even this season, which would mean those distributions don't drop any further, but still a few months to go. There won't be any changes to the A-League women's salary cap. That will remain the same. But it is all but confirmed that Canberra won't have a men's team in time for next season. But discussions are continuing with 2 interested investing parties. Nick Garcia is not leaving the APL. He's been mysteriously appointed a new position overseeing expansion and investment. And finally, John Gianluca from Melbourne Victory and Casper Tafter of the Brisbane Roar have been elected to the board of the APL in an election I can tell you that many journalists have been asking for information on and have not been told a peep. They had no idea if it was ever going to happen, if these board director slots were ever going to be filled, but they are now. Christian, what's your pick of that bunch?
Wow, you want me to choose one bullet point from that? I could choose every single one and talk up. Probably the one that sticks out as, I mean, the distributions. I think if that falls even further, I think that'd be a big issue. You've mentioned that they're going to break even this season, so it's expected that it's not going to drop. But I mean, who knows? You know, we didn't expect the decrease at the start of this season, and it happened. So you just don't know until they say officially, right? Until they get all their financial reports in check. And Jacob made the great point of the market now being so volatile. That's probably another reason why this decision has been made now, given the past couple of weeks in the financial world. For those who follow that, it's been, it's just extremely volatile and uneasy. It's just very unpredictable. So there's a lot of contributing factors going into that. So I think the distributions is probably the key point that I'm taking away from that. If it falls further, then I'm very, very worried.
All right, let's start talking some football, shall we? Do let us know in the comments what you think about the proposed changes from the APL or the PFA, the negotiations starting in the next couple of weeks. That's going to be a fascinating story to follow. But of course, it was kind of, as we say, this kind of day from hell for Australian football on Wednesday, and very disappointing night for Sydney FC. Their 1-0 win on the night, courtesy of Joe Lolly, with about 10 minutes left in the game, not quite enough to overturn their 2-0 first leg deficit. I think I've seen a lot of people be critical of Sydney FC, Jacob. I think that's slightly been masked by the fact that they were coming up against an opposition that a lot of people expected them to beat. Obviously, the damage was done in the first leg. I thought they threw everything at it on Wednesday night. They shifted up their style a little bit. Joe Lolly was playing this kind of like Bukayo Saka wing-back role, kind of out of possession and then just trying to get forward. Ryan Grant was bombing forward from defence at pretty much every opportunity. There were 2 offside goals. The opposition keeper had a very good game as well. There are lots of kind of these little sliding door moments, but as their name suggests, Lion City Sailors defended like lions. They were immense. Of course, Bailey Wright, an Australian, at the heart of it all. And they managed to hold on to their first leg league, and they will be the one hosting the ACL 2 final, not Sydney FC.
Yeah, nothing but a huge missed opportunity for Sydney, really, and for Australian football as a whole, to host, yeah, the final of a continental competition. That's, yeah, big missed opportunity, and it's kind of frustrating because it did feel like at times in this second leg, Sydney were the better side, and they were drastically improved on how they came out in that first leg. And you touched on a few of those points there, Lockie, in terms of player roles and things. And Ryan Grant, I thought, I remember about 10 minutes into the match thinking, what is he doing leading the line here? It's a bit of a strange move for him, playing in that half space, being the guy to make those runs. But I thought it was actually an inspired move from Tele to do that, because it opened up that space for Douglas Costa, and Grant himself found himself on the end of three fantastic opportunities. I think he was twice offside. He put one in the back of the net that was offside. He was at the heart of it all in attack. So maybe as a late career shift to like a number 10 or a wing position perhaps, for Ryan
He's just
Grant
had a late career shift from the outside of defence to the inside.
into the inside, and now he's going to move up front, based on that performance. But no, it was incredibly frustrating because, and especially in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, Sydney were creating really, really good chances, and like you mentioned, the keeper just had a blinder, and they just couldn't get the ball past him. I think Joe Lolly had a chance. Was it Caceres had one in the first half that forced a good save as well. It just was extremely frustrating from a Sydney perspective, because from what they generated, the chances they generated, they arguably could have come away with that 2-0 result and pushed it to extra time, and then who knows what's going to happen there, and who's going to come out on top after that. But at least it's giving themselves a chance, right? Whereas just it's a good individual performance from a Lion City player in their goalkeeper that sort of keeps them at bay for the most part. And I think that there were a few players that perhaps weren't quite up to par and weren't at their own standard. Like Adrian Segacic obviously started, which I think probably can all agree was a good move to start him, and knowing you need to get those goals, having that threat on the pitch from the start is a good idea. But he just was ineffective. I think perhaps the confidence that he's been getting is almost sort of got to him a little bit too much, where he was taking these shots that perhaps weren't the best decision in that moment, where laying it off to a teammate in a better position would have been the better option. But just frustrating is the way to do it. But it's all credit to Lion City, because they made it frustrating and they did what they needed to do. They came out, they defended well, their goalkeeper had a blinder, and they were still looked threatening in that second half in transition, right? And we were discussing this on the live stream. How are they going to come out in the second half? Are they going to completely shut the game down and play 11 behind the ball and just try and kill it off now? Or do they try and look to hit Sydney FC as Sydney start to spread themselves a little bit more and that space opens up? And that's exactly what they did. They pressed a bit harder in the second half, they played more in transition and looked to create those opportunities in behind. So I thought it was a fantastic game from Lion City's perspective, and a really good fixture from them across the two ties, because they did exactly what they needed to do. And for as disappointing as it is that Sydney aren't the ones into the final and they're not going to be hosting it, for Lion City, it's a couple of weeks ago they were dead and buried, and they
amazing.
Thought that their hopes of going any further in this competition were done, and then they get handed a gift and they just run with it for the hills, and they've made it all the way to the final. So massive congratulations to them, and just to keep it Australian centered, Bailey Wright as well, obviously in the heart of defence for them, he'll be representing Australia in the final, so best of luck to him.
I think there was that double save, the close passage, the two headers. One was off Patrick Lamala and another one from Joe Lolly as well. Just came so close. And Christian, I don't know if you've seen it, but Lolly did an interview after the game, and you could see just how emotional he was. There was just clearly this innate belief in the squad, which I think was well placed, that they could get the job done. And on another day, a couple of those, the offside goals, they count because the run is made slightly later, or a shot is a few inches in a different direction, and all of a sudden Sydney win, and they clearly thought that was on the cards, which it was. And just being so close to history, really, and being able to host this Champions League final. And I think the unfortunate thing about it is that in the future, when we kind of see this competition mature, I think we will come to terms with the fact that an Australian club getting to the semi-finals is actually going to be a pretty good performance. But because of the run that they've had, they had some really good comeback victories in the early rounds of the knockout phase. But because they've got here, because of the Sanfrecce Hiroshima situation, because they were kicked out and Lion City came in, and there was so much expectation that this probably should have been the easiest tie of the whole lot, that it's going to be remembered as a disappointment because they just didn't get to that final phase, which I think is really kind of upsetting, a little bit sad.
And I mean, yeah, Jacob said it's a massive disappointment. That's like a massive understatement because, as you mentioned, that San Frecce game, we were all expecting that to be their matchup, and we were discussing, on podcast episodes throughout the season, is it possible? Can Sydney go all the way? And we were expecting Sydney to play like John Book, the San Frecces, all of these top teams who we expect to be there. So, in all due respect, to not get to the final now after what's happened, it is disappointing. You can't
It is,
twist
yeah.
it anywhere or another. I managed to catch the second half, and I was going in and out of the live stream of your boys talking. And Sydney, the ball was camped in their attacking half. They were just going, blow for blow, shot after shot, and they were, after Lolly scored that goal, I got the sense that, okay, this is on here. You know when you get that feeling when your team scores a goal and you feel, okay,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
it now. You could just sense that second goal is going to come. I thought that was going to be it, maybe somewhere in stoppage time, but yeah, obviously it wasn't to be. And I think now, obviously looking forward, this competition is now over for Sydney. What I noticed was Tallow only made 2 substitutions in this game. That's how seriously he took this. And now that they're out, they've put all these eggs in one basket, so to speak. They've got 3 games left in the A-League. They've made 2 subs in this game gone by. Is that going to come back to bite them? At the end of the season, in terms of whether they make the top 6 or not, because they only, I think, believe that he subbed off Adrian Sekic and Joel King. I believe they were the 2 players who went off. So to take out one player of your front 7, essentially, because let's face it, the midfielders are basically playing as forwards. They're all going up and trying to score a goal.
And Ryan Grant.
And Ryan Grant, make it 8. So, I don't know if that might be costly come season's end. We'll wait and find out. But yeah, like I said, just a major blow because you really thought that, they could seize this opportunity. They've got the talent, and we said it all the way from match day 1 when they were playing that really good football. This is a team that can really do some damage, and to have the road end here is, it's a shame.
Well, they're going to have no choice but to regroup for the final 3 games of their A-League regular season campaign, and that gives me a lovely segue. Thank you, Christian. Instead of doing our usual regular weekend look on a Friday, we thought we looked down the ladder, and all these teams that are in competition for finals, they're all kind of even up on their games played. So we're going to take a look at the matchups that they actually have in the final 3 rounds and try to assess where they sit and what all these scenarios are, and try to kind of put things in perspective as we head into the final 3 weeks of the regular season. So if you are listening to the podcast, we're throwing a visual up on the screen now, which has all the teams and their fixtures. Blue means home, yellow means away, and then you got the points total there as well. So we'll start from the bottom. The Newcastle Jets only included in this table because it is mathematically possible. But I talked about this on the Chris McPherson show this week. They are Dunsky. They are on 29 points. They're a fair way off, and they have to play Sydney, Western Sydney, and Melbourne Victory. Jacob, it was a nice story when they were winning all those games, but they are too far behind now.
Just about. If there was like 1 point, even 2 points between them and MacArthur or them in Adelaide, maybe just because of the quality of MacArthur and Adelaide recently, you go there and with a chance still. But yeah, to be 3 points behind MacArthur still, and then what is it, 5 points off of the 6, that is just a bit too much, especially when you're considering the quality of opposition they'll be coming up against. I don't think that that's an indictment on Newcastle. I think they've played some really good football in the last couple of months since sort of the closure of the January transfer window. They've been exceptional and playing really good football, getting great results, but it's been too little too late for them because of the starts of the season that they had, where they were massively inconsistent and just couldn't do what they've been doing now, where they're turning draws into wins and things like that. Look, they've picked 3 of the most difficult teams that you could in this situation for those final 3 fixtures. Sydney arguably represents their best chance of getting points, I think, just on paper. Christian kind of mentioned it there. there wasn't a massive amount of rotation in that ACL2 game. They'll be deflated. There's no two ways about it. They will be deflated after that loss. So, you know, there is a chance perhaps to grab it. And obviously, you know, traveling to Sydney isn't too bad for Newcastle. It could be a lot worse. So, you know, they're definitely in with a chance there. But then, you know, the other two, the Wanderers and the Victory, definitely look too strong for them at the moment. And the Wanderers, I think, are one of the best sides in the competition at this point in time. So, yeah, it sucks because the Jets have been sort of the feel-good story of the second half of the season. But, yeah, I do kind of agree with you, Lockie, that it might just be too much of a mountain for them to have to climb.
All right, so now we get to the top six, just the race to get into finals. And for just the purposes of this conversation, I'm saying that Victory and Wanderers are good. They're both 6 points clear of 7th place and goal difference as well. So we'll talk about them when it comes to the race for seconds, but I'm pretty confident that Victory and the Wanderers will make it. If not, then you can all laugh at me in a few weeks' time. But the three teams are in kind of contention here. Obviously, we've got Sydney FC, who are currently occupying that 6th place, then Adelaide United and the Macarthur Bulls, right? So Sydney 34 points, Adelaide 33, Macarthur 32. So there's a 1 point step between each of them. Now, the Bulls, for me, need a minimum 7 points and probably 9, right? And I think we're kind of looking at that 39, 40, 41 point marker is what's going to require to get into finals. They've got the Mariners away, then Victory at home, Western Sydney at home. I think that's a pretty tough run of fixtures. So I'm going to tend to, and we've already kind of said, I think the Bulls are probably too far away. Obviously, they have a chance to overturn some of those suggested results, but they're definitely the least likely to make it through for me. And then, Christian, we get to a point where it's actually quite nice because we're comparing the Sydney and Adelaide fixtures. They actually both play Melbourne City away to end their seasons in different rounds because Adelaide have the bye in the final round of the season. So we can kind of cancel those out. If you remember your year 4 maths, you take one away from both sides, do the same to both sides of the equation. And then we're left with Sydney FC with a point advantage, the Newcastle Jets at home and Western United away. And then Adelaide United with obviously the point disadvantage, Wellington Phoenix at home and Brisbane Roar away. And as soon as I see this opposition and, you know, take into account that, as Jacob was saying, Sydney FC are going to have to, you know, field a pretty tired squad this weekend against the Jets, all of a sudden I'm feeling pretty good about Adelaide United again, having Wellington and Brisbane rather than having to play Western United.
I just saw Jacob's face. He was like, really? I don't see it. I'm thinking the same thing as you, Lockie, just when you were reading that. I'm actually thinking that Adelaide's going to overtake Sydney because there actually might be a good possibility just given that fixture run. I mean, Wellington out of finals contention, Brisbane out of finals contention. Then, as you mentioned, they're both playing City away. Like, on paper, I know it's on paper, but you'd probably give the edge to Adelaide. And considering all that's happened to Sydney in the past week, I know Jacob's shaking his head.
He can't believe what he's saying.
I don't know. Have you guys watched Adelaide play in the last 4 months?
They have been bad.
Yes, but
Sydney
have got Western United and Melbourne City their last 2 games, and the Newcastle Jets side next up, who, all those reasons you mentioned, Jacob, Newcastle do have a few advantages there. For as bad as Adelaide have been, it's on, right? Like,
they just lost 4-1 to Perth. It doesn't matter who they're up against. There's not a hope. There's not a hope at this point.
So you reckon Adelaide's not going to win a game from now until the end of the season?
No, honestly, I'd be surprised if they did. I reckon they might grab a draw here or there, but even the Raw. Wow. Look, you guys were laughing at me last week when I said that only conceding 2 against Perth would be a good result for the Adelaide defence, and then they went and conceded 4, just proving my point right. I think that like, honestly, you guys don't understand just how bad they have been recently.
Lockie,
it's like a combination.
Lockie, can you Photoshop that when Lockie did that face? Just before I spoke up, please. Just put it all on socials. Amazing.
But it's a combination, yes, of bad defending and all that, and that's a known issue. But it just feels like the club has decided that season over, right? Obviously, the announcement of Carl Viet not being renewed for next season, the players, when they're out there on the pitch, it looks like they're just going through the motions. They're not really playing for anything. Obviously, that's probably not the case. They all want to win. They're professional footballers, don't get me wrong, but it looks that way in terms of compared to the opposition. The opposition just puts in more effort all the time. So it does kind of feel like the club's packed it in a little bit now, and that plus the recent performances, I just don't see a world in which Adelaide can surpass Sydney. I'd be surprised if they
all of a sudden, hearing myself talk about that, I'm thinking, well, the Bulls have the Mariners, which they should be considered favourites in. Maybe if they can just win that and one more, maybe that actually will be enough at 38 points, given the fixtures and just the quality of the form lines of both Sydney and Adelaide.
Well, even just a win and a draw for them might be a
Victory and the Wanderers both have to play Newcastle and Macarthur at different stages still. So I think that's pretty interesting. It's going to depend a bit on, obviously other results. A team's going to be in contention for finals by that point, or will they already be out of the race? So I think, have to wait and see for further results.
All right, let's look further up the table. We're going to talk about the race for seconds. Again, just for simplifying this conversation, Auckland have already won the Premier's Plate. We know it's not locked away, but having 4 teams in one kind of section here is enough. So we've got Melbourne City, who currently occupy second place on 43 points. Western United are 2 behind on 41, and then a further 2 back are both the Western Sydney Wanderers and Melbourne Victory. Now, I think, having looked through this already, the strength of fixtures actually makes this incredibly exciting. So I think if Western Sydney or Victory, because they're 4 points behind City, I think they have to go perfect. 9 points from 9. They both have good goal difference if they want to get the second place. And obviously this is an Asian Champions League elite spot as well. However, out of all those 4 teams, the Wanderers and Victory definitely have the best fixture run. So they both have tough tests this weekend coming up. The Wanderers play Melbourne City and Victory play Auckland. However, after that, Christian, as you mentioned, they then both somehow play the Newcastle Jets and the Macarthur Bulls, which they will be favourites in, whether it's home or away. So they have tough tests, but they're both at home. I think one of these teams definitely has the potential to earn 9 points from their final 3 games. So then, if you're City or Western United, you are targeting 49 points as the marker to just take Western Sydney and Victory out of the equation. So what does that mean? It means 2 wins for City and probably 3 wins for Western United, just to avoid the roulette of going down to goal difference. So City have to play Western Sydney, of course, but then they've got Adelaide United and Sydney FC at home. Western United also have to play Sydney FC at home, but travel to Suncorp, which you will have actually already seen that game by the time you're listening to this, and then also have to host Auckland, which we know on the final day. So I think that the strength of the 2 fixtures for the higher 2 teams is much stronger than for the Wanderers and the Victory, and I think it could mean that this race for the second spot goes really down to the wire.
I think this next round is pivotal, right? Because you've got Wanderers against City. So, I mean, City can essentially, mathematically take the Wanderers out of the second spot conversation, right, with a win. So just say that happens, Wanderers are eliminated. And then you've got Victory playing at home to Auckland. Assuming Auckland keep their good form from the whole season, they've obviously got top spot trying to lock that up. If they win, Victory are out of that conversation as well. So I think this is a really crucial round coming up, because if Victory and Wanderers both win their games, then it becomes really, really tight. And then, with 2 rounds to go, it starts getting really interesting. So, if I had to pick one team to make second, just looking at this fixture run, look, I haven't given a lot of love to Western United, or I have, but not as much as some people want me to. But I think Western United at this stage now, I think, I'd probably put them as slight favourites. And especially given, that game now against Brisbane Roar, which starts in about 6 minutes as we speak, I think, because we've seen results this season as well. Like Western United, they've matched up well both against Sydney and Auckland, right? When we didn't expect it. I think their game styles match up really well. So I think they're more than capable of taking points off them, albeit quality sides. I'd give the edge to Western United.
I think, Jacob, for me, City, just because they've got points in the bank, right? That obviously means a lot. But, Parramatta has been an incredibly difficult place to go in recent months. They've won 4 games in a row at home, the Wanderers. That's the first time that's happened since 2015. So the Wanderers will go into this game on the weekend as favourites. And then all of a sudden, someone's going to sneak up on you. Western probably will have won on Thursday night and leapfrog them at that point. And then I'm guessing that maybe one of the Wanderers or Victory will also just be that 1 point behind you. So, or if you lose that game against Western Sydney, you all of a sudden get a bit nervous, right? Or maybe just getting a bit shaky if you don't get nervous. But then you just got Adelaide United and Sydney SC at home to close out, which is probably advantageous. But yeah, getting a little bit shaky.
It's this is what we were all hoping for, right? Like we've been talking about how close it has been all season, and I don't think any of us quite realised the sort of the permutations that are going to come out of these last few rounds because of the fact that they are playing each other, a lot of them, and obviously Christian pointed out the fact that obviously it's Wanderers and City in this round, which is going to be the big one, and Victory in Auckland, but yeah, it's super exciting and super close, and there are some where you can almost kind of pencil in a win, right? Like you said, Western and Brisbane, probably going to be a Western win, and you can all laugh at me if I'm wrong about that. And then you've got City and Adelaide. You're probably going to give City the edge there. Victory and the Jets on the final day, you're probably going to go in favour of Victory there. Like it seems like each team has a win, so they've each got 3 points essentially in the bag at this point, you'd think. But then it's those other games where they can trip up and things can happen, and those big 6-pointers, like a Wanderer City, like a Victory Auckland, like a Western Auckland, that it could completely change the complexion of the table. So no, it's a really exciting run in, and while it's a shame it's not happening for top spot, it's still happening for that Asian spot, right, for next season, because Auckland, if they do wrap up the Premier's Plate, it's going to go to the second place team, and so there is a lot on the line here. And obviously you skip that first stage of the finals as well, which is a big boost to finishing as high as possible. So yeah, look, I don't know who to say is my favourite at this point in time, whether it is Western or City. I think City have a little bit more composure, might not be the right words, but they're kind of, they've been there, they've done that, and they kind of feel like they deserve to be at this point, whereas Western, I think they're trying to push for it. So whether that comes into play and City rest on their laurels and drop points, I don't know. It's crazy, but it's going to be good fun to watch.
No Matt Leckie or Samuel Suprain as well for City this weekend, so...
That is true, but they've been like that all season long, right? And they've still been able to get results.
Not Suprain though. He's been relatively consistent, no. Which will be interesting, of course, with the attacking prowess of the Western Sydney Wanderers. But there you go. Let us know what you think in the comments of the podcast and the video. Who's your favourite for second? Who's going to sneak into the 6? Massive games everywhere now. They're all big, unless it's, I don't know, Perth, Wellington, which probably happens at some point. Just to finish us off tonight, I want to give a shout out to a couple of extra Australian football figures who will often be, refereeing in the Club World Cup in America during the off season. Ali Reza Fagani will be blowing the whistle out in the middle. Sean Evans is being appointed as a dedicated VAR, whilst Ashley Beecham and Anton Shatinyan will run the line as well. And fascinatingly, the main referees are all going to be wearing body cameras, Christian. So accessible by the broadcast. So I'm sure it's an education point as well. But we're going to get some POV action as well, which I guess is kind of cool. Only 41 kind of member associations around the world are represented in this refereeing group. So that works out to about, 2.8 referees per association, and we have 4. So we're well and truly pulling our weight there. And I think that's something that, as a footballing nation, we should be proud of as well.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely something to be proud of, especially given that there's been a lot of conversation around refereeing and the future of it in this country, right? With, you see domestically, like fights here and there, you see parents on social media saying, you'd feel sorry to be a ref in this day and age, given, all what's happening under 14, 16s, whatever it may be. But, to see these types of numbers and turnout at this type of level, it's great to see. And I like the camera incorporation, because I think as well, also in the professional game, for it would help for referee match reports. They can use that as evidence. I think it's a good
Mm.
initiative, and also for the fans, it's good to see that different perspective on the field, right? Which is cool. So yeah, it's great to see.
My thought is, are they going to be able to
Yeah.
use it for
Oh,
VAR?
wow, that's a very good point.
You know,
Well, given
does that come
referees
into play? That would
sometimes
be
are so
interesting,
far
wouldn't
away
it?
from the action, I'll open a whole can of worms, won't it?
Well, you'd hope not.
Well, then you could truly put to rest that whole clear and obvious debate then, because it's like, how did you
Yeah,
not
yeah.
see it? We can see it on your
Yeah.
That's
POV
the thing,
cam,
right?
you know.
It's like if you can see it clearly on the POV cam, then that's a bad decision. If it
But
gets
what if the
overturned.
referee's eyes were closed? Maybe he was
Yeah.
asleep for 10 seconds. You don't know that, right?
He was blinking. He was just blinking when that happened.
It was blinking.
Anyway, Channel 10 have also released a few more viewership stats in the last week. The league's TV audience across both the men's and women's is up 11%. That has plateaued a little bit after the start of the season, but we understand that due to the front load of derbies and things like this, that was just always going to be the way it was. But almost reached 4 million Australians as well, which is a bit higher than what I thought it would be. So small numbers, but encouraging as well. Just thought I'd bring you up to date on that. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. A loaded one. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Jacob Stevens, I hope you enjoyed talking.
Yes, I tried my best, obviously, an early wake up this morning for that
Come
Arsenal
on.
game. So I'm kind of just making my way through this, just going with the flow. But no, it was a good discussion as
I
always.
know, Christian, you're threatening to cancel as well after both Arsenal and Inter Milan progressed in the same morning, but thank you for showing up.
This is Australian football podcast. Like, we don't have to bring European football into it. We're not interested in that, especially not today. But no, great to chat.
All right, give Christian some crap in the comments as well. It's always good fun. We enjoy it in the group chat, but that will do. As I say, thank you all very much for listening at home. We appreciate your company. We'll see you on Tuesday after what is going to be a very, very important round of A-League football. Thank you again for listening. Goodbye.